Zok Tehillah Gemara. Omar Rav Papa. Rav Papa said, Alpha. So we know the Mishnah lists off three avodas that are considered a unique avodah that will be mechayiv you if you do that avodah when it's chametz, and that is during the lisha, which is kneading the dough. Aricha is shaping the dough, and afiyasa is baking the dough. Three distinct things, and the Gemara added also spraying it with water or smearing it with water. Those are the avodas. I better check my audio sound to make sure that we're good. Because last night I had testing. Okay, we're good. So Zok to Gemara. V'chayiv al lishasa v'al arichasa v'al afiyasa. Amar Papa. Afa loikeshtayim. If someone bakes chometz dike mincha, he gets malchus twice. He only did one maisa. He did afiyah. Zok the Gemara, Papa alaricha, achas alarichasa, v'achas alafiyasa. You get malchus for aricha by doing afiyah. How can you explain that? Zok Rashi, the afiyah gemar arichahi. The afiyah, I guess, putting it into the oven is also a final step of forming the dough. I guess when you put it in the oven, you're placing it in such a position where it's going to keep its form. So that also involves somewhat of the completion of the aricha, and therefore afiyah has two avodas baked into it. Oh, baked into it. That's a pun. Thank you very much. So Zok to Gemara, v'ha'amrit, didn't we say earlier in the Brisa, ma'afiyah miyuchedesh, shehi ma'isa yechidi, it's a standalone independent ma'isa, v'chayoven Allah b'fnei atzma, so that would indicate that afiyah is only afiyah. Afiyah doesn't have in it a component of the completion of an aricha. So why would Rav Papa say that you get malchus for aricha by doing afiyah, meaning afiyah automatically gets someone two sets of malchus? Zok to Gemara loy kasha. Had archu v'afahu. If he did both actions, then you're not going to get two malchus for the afiyah. Since you did the aricha itself, the gemara aricha that occurs during the afiyah is bundled up with the aricha that you already did, and there's only one malchus for the aricha and one malchus for the afiyah, and that's what the brisa meant, that each one is a ma'isi yechidi. But when Rav Papa said loikesh daim, that's who the arich chavrei v'yoyivlei v'yafa. What if the actual forming of the shape of the dough was done by somebody else? Then he hands it to you, and you make the afiyah. You're also doing a little bit, somewhat of the completion of the aricha, and therefore you will get two malchus for the afiyah by itself, because it's not really a afiyah by itself. It also has a component of aricha in it. As Rashi says, why would Rav Papa say you get two malchus just for the afiyah? This is Iker Chaser here. We need to look at the Shita Mukubetzes who adds to it. So let me see if I can see what number to look at. It's Yutches and Yutes. So if I look at Yutches, if I can even find it over here. By Yutches it says Yutches v'afahu leka l'chiyuve tarti. Since he did both, you won't get two malchus for the afiyah itself. The iu nami archa, he himself did the forming. Hilchach leka l'chiyuve. You wouldn't be mechayiv him twice on the afiyah because he did the aricha himself. However, Zok Rashi, if the aricha was done by his friend, arach chavrei v'afahu, then mechayiv chavrei chada. The chaver who only did aricha will get one malchus for the aricha. The iutarti afia ve'aricha. He will get two malchus, one for afia, which he's doing, but the afia also includes with it a component of aricha, the gomra. He's doing like the final step of the aricha by placing it into the oven. I guess he does something about forming it, because I don't know. Nowadays you have a challah pan that's in the shape of a challah. Once it's in there, you're not doing anything. But in those days, they just put the challah in the oven the way it is. There's an Israeli bakery where you can walk into the oven and take the challah right off the oven. So when you're placing it just on a flat surface, so placing it is also like forming it a little bit, because you're holding it in shape as you place it on the flat pan. The gomer v'yafag. The size of the oven.
Stick it on.
But whatever it is, if it's not in a formed pan, placing it in the oven has a small component of somewhat forming the shape. V'yavagav the chayiv chavrei aricha, even though his chaver also is mechuyev for aricha for the part that his chaver did, hu chayiv nami Allah, he will also be mechuyev for it. You might say, if someone got a chiyuv for it, it's like double jeopardy. How could two people get a chiyuv for the same thing? Zokt Rashi, we're going to soon see that you could be mechuyev for machametz acha machametz, even though one person made it chometz already. So let's say someone makes the dough chometz, and now you want to bake it chometz. You might say, how did I make it any worse? It was already chometz. But we're going to bring psukim that indicate that even though it was chometz already, doing further avoidos with it, when it's chometz, also will get you a lav. So therefore, it's not fair to say that just because one person did the aricha, that doesn't mean that the next guy won't be able to get malchus for aricha as well. Gebaltik.
Chometz after the
Lisha. After the Lisha, could have become chometz ready. That's right. So even though it's chometz already and it's like posel already, we're done. Continuing on, still will be a chiyuv iser and a chiyuv malchus. You don't say once it's chometz, so it's gone, it's done. Every avodah that you do, even after it's chometz, there'll also be malchus for. Tonder abad bechor sha'ach soidam. In those days, they used to think. I mean, I shouldn't say used to think. There was such a condition where if they wouldn't do bloodletting, the animal will die. I guess there was high blood pressure. I don't know exactly what the condition was, and I don't know if that's really a medical concern today. But in those days, even a makis dam would sometimes be called a roife, would be called a doctor, because it would save the life of somebody who needed this hakaza. So bechor sha'ach soidam. What if you had a bechor? Now the halacha is with a bechor is it's kaddish, it's a carbon. Once it gets a mum, then it's given to the kohen can use it as chulin. So if you have a bechor, but Allah is you're not allowed to be matal a mum in a bechor. It's usher to inflict a mum on a carbon. So what happens if you have a bechor and if you don't wound it to take out blood, it's going to die. So are you allowed to wound it to take out blood? So the halach is, we have a machlokes how this is done. Makizin oisoi es adam b'mokem shem oisim b'mum. There are many places where you could inject a needle, extract blood, without it being a mum, because it will heal back. And that's how this process should be done. Ve'ein makizin es adam b'mokem she'oisim b'mum. Divrei Meir. But if it's a place where it would cause a mum, and Rashi says that's either in his eyelid or in his ear, in the animal's ear, where it doesn't heal properly, and that would render the carbon a balmum, and now you couldn't bring it as a carbon anymore, there you're not allowed to wound it. Find a different place where even if you bloodlet, it won't cause it to have a mum. That is the shita of Rav Meir. You could make the akaza even in a place where it would cause a mum. The only rule is that if you made a mum, you had a right to make the mum. You had a right to make the mum because we're going to soon see you're allowed to make the mum because it's a dovish einim eschav, and you're not trying to make the mum. You're trying to actually help heal the animal by bloodletting. So therefore, you're allowed to make the mum, but you can't say, okay, now that it has a mum, So now it's no longer a carbon, so now the Kohen can shecht it and use it for himself. For Zoivite, you still have to wait. You can't benefit from it. You still have to wait for it to get a natural mum. So that mum, we won't let you rely on that mum to shecht it. So Rashi says, until some other mum occurs, which you would have had to have waited for anyway, if it wouldn't have required hakaza. We know a bechar is a carbon. Until it has a mum, it's not chulin. Once it has a mum, it's chulin, and the kohen can shecht it and use it for himself. But based on the mum that he had to make for the hakaza, that's not a mum that would release the animal. You would have to wait until another mum occurs naturally. So that is the sheet of Al-Chum. So Reb Meir holds you cannot make a mum. The Chum says you can make a mum, but you can't check the lice mum. And Reb Shimon has a further lenient position. And Reb Shimon Omer, af nishchat al oisay mum. You could even shecht it because of that mum. So you make a mum on the animal to give the akaza, and then once you make the mum, okay, now I have an animal that I'm allowed to use.
They want to make the
Akaza shouldn't die. If they don't do a akaza, this condition was thought to have killed the animal. So they have to save the animal's life by making a akaza. That's going to cause a mum. So the question is, am I allowed to make a mum or not? Reb Meir holds you're not allowed to make a mum. Reb Yehuda holds you could. Reb Yehuda holds even though you made a mum, you can't benefit from the mum. You have to wait till it gets another mum in order for you to use it. And Reb Shimon held even more make holds, no, you're allowed to make a mum, and because you made a mum, now you're allowed to eat it too. And Rabbi Yehuda is the most extreme in the other direction. Afilu meis ein makizin loy es adam. Even if it's going to die, you don't make hakaza at all. Even if it's going to die, you're not allowed to make a kaza because you're not allowed to make a mum. As Rashi says, afilu yomis im lo yakizenu. Even if it will die, if you don't take blood out of it, ein makizin loy beper kamad psochim. Mefarish time with Rabbi Yehuda. In the first parak of Psochim, the Gemara explains what's the reasoning for Rabbi Yehuda, and the reason is really meikar din you should be able to. But the concern is since when people are faced with a loss, they panic. And yisharisle makom she'einoishin baymum. If we allow him to do a kaza in a place where it wouldn't make a mum, asi lemevad b'makom mum. Someone thinks his animal is dying, he'll panic and he'll make the hakaza in an unapproved place. And Rabbi Yehuda agrees with Rabbi Meir that if you made the mum, if you made the hakaza and caused the mum, then it would be usher. You wouldn't be able to use it. You wouldn't be able to use the animal. As Rabbi Meir said, you have to have another mum. I'm not. You have a fellow. If you don't do cause the animal's going to die.
It's going to die.
Right. So the owner panics, or the kohen panics.
It goes to the coin.
If it has a mum.
Regardless, it goes to the.
No. If it doesn't, if it does not have a mum, it's a carbon. It doesn't go to the kohen.
No. Yeah, coin gets part of it.
But if it has a mum, the kohen gets all of it, and it's chulin with no restrictions. Right? He can put it in the freezer and he can save it.
It's going to die, maybe coin can't eat it.
So why can't he eat it? If he saves the animal, if he do this medical procedure, if he doesn't know it's going to die, it'll be an avela.
That's what I'm saying.
And in fact, Rabbi Yehuda holds, leave it, don't touch it, because if you touch it because of your panic to save it, you might do something that's usher. And what you might do is you might make a hakaza where you're not supposed to, and therefore he says better don't touch it at all because you'll get into trouble. Okay, so those are the four shitas. So Amar Abchia Bar Abba, Amar Yochanan, Hakoil Moedim, everybody agrees. So Rashi clarifies this. Afal Gavde Pligi B'matal Mum Achar Mum. Even though here we have a machlokes. If you're matal a mum after a mum, kagoin hacha the ach soidam. Here, what are you making a mum in? You're making a mum in an animal that's about to drop dead. There's no greater mum than an animal that's about to drop dead. So over here we have a machlokes. If you're allowed to make a mum on an animal that already has a mum. As the Rashi says again, Avagav the pligi b'mat mum achar mum koin hacha the ochsoidam the ein loch mum gadol mizeh shara yamus. That's a pretty decent mum if it's going to die if the condition is not corrected. Afilu achi, even though over here there's a machlokes, everybody would agree by our sugya with mechametz achar mechametz b'menachos kloimer kol ha-mesayin b'chimutz. Anyone who does any part of the process in the mincha that has chametz, kloin oirech acher alosh v'oifa acher oirech kulan chayav. So unlike by the balmum, we say once it has a mum anyway, so we allow you to make a second mum. Well, there's a machlokes about it. If you could, if you can't, but by mechametz of a mincha, everybody holds. Just because it's already chametz, that doesn't give you a license to proceed. There'll still be the same chaymer ha'isser doing anything with this dough of the mincha that became chametz. So hakomodim b'mechametz acha mechametz shu chayiv. How do we know that? We know it from a pasuk. T'chsiv lo yisayas chametz. Don't have anything to do with the chametz. And then it says v'lo yisayaf chametz. So even though it already says you can't do anything with the chametz, which means you cannot do lisha nor can you do aricha, the Torah still says you're not allowed to bake it when it's chametz. So obviously, every step of the way, even though it's already a lost cause, because the mincha is chametz already, it's still usher to do the afiyah. So we see clearly that by a mincha, it's the chametz isser is much more chomer than just the mum issue by a bukhar that had a mum. What about the mesaris acher mesaris? The halacha is you're not allowed to neuter an animal. What if an animal was neutered already and someone took a further step to neuter it further? That would also be chayiv. So the mesaris acher mesaris show chayiv. Everybody agrees that mesaris acher mesaris is chayiv. Zokt Rashi afilu bebehemas chulon. Even not a carbon, even a regular chulon animal, you're not allowed to be mesaris. Dichsivu va'arzachem lo yisasu v'imbo echad v'charis habeitzim. If someone went and severed the beitzim inside the sack that it's in, v'nicham tluyin bekis, but they're still in the kiss, they're still in existence, they're just not connected to the body anymore, and so that's mesaris. And then another fellow comes along, uboacha v'niska and lagamri, and then somebody else completely removed them. Chayiv gamu, the second guy is chayiv already, even though he's literally beating a dead horse. Tichsiv, it says in the pasuk, umoch v'chosus v'nosuk v'korus. It lists off four levels of what the isser is on being mesaris. So im al koros hu chayiv. If you're chayiv for koros, for cutting it, al noitek loikos again, surely you should be chayiv for completely removing it. So why would the Torah say v'nosuk if we already said the choros? Ella, it must be noisik acher koros shu chayiv. It must be that the Torah is telling you, even though it's already severed, if you go further and remove it completely, that will also be a chiyuv of mesaris. So therefore, again, the Gemara can say that mesaris, acher mesaris, everybody agrees that would be chayiv. Loi nechlaku, the whole machlokes of our sugi that we quoted with the balmum, with the animal that requires a koza, ele b'matel mum bebalmum. The discussion that we just quoted, the four-way machlokes, would only be relevant when you're matel a mum in an animal that would have otherwise died anyway, which is a balmum. And there, a meir savar, it says kol mum lo yiboy, meaning you're not allowed to, even though it has a mum already, kol mum lo yiboy, you're not allowed to put another mum in. As Rashi says, kol ribuyahu umashmud afilu bebal mum lo yitin mum acher. That is the sheet of Reb Meir. That's where Reb Meir said you're only allowed to make a kaza on the part of the body that it won't make a mum. For Rabbanan Savri, the Rabbanan said, no, you could even make a kaza where it will make a mum, because anyway the behemoth is a mum already, because it says in the pasuk, Tamid yeh l'ratzain. And Rashi says, Ksiva Bereisha the beginning of the pasuk is a Tamid yeh l'ratzain. Umash mahachi, oisai shu tamim. You know what type of animal you're not allowed to make a mum in? An animal that's tamim. Only on a pristine animal that does not have a mum are you forbidden to make a mum. But if the animal already has a mum, you're allowed to make a mum on it. Frek the Gemara for our Meir Nami Yoksiv Tamim Yila Ratzain. According to Meir, it does say those words in the pasuk of Tamim Yila Ratzain. So how could you just ignore these words? It's mashma that only an animal that's a tamim are you prohibited from making a mum. So that's to tell you that if, even before it became a carbon, it had a mum. There's no issue to make a mum because it never got kedusha. Because you can't consecrate an animal that has a mum for a carbon. Frankly, why would I need a pasuk to teach me that? Bal mum meikara dikla ba'almahu. It never got kedusha. I shouldn't need a pasuk to tell me that you're allowed to make a mum in such an animal, as Rashi says, dikla ba'almahu. Deloi kadosh. It doesn't get kedusha as a guf. You can't make it into a carbon. Umay itzrich krala mishri lahatal by mum. According to Reb Meir, why would he need a pasuk of tamim yil rotain to teach us that an animal that's not a carbon, you're allowed to make a mum in it? Ella, Reb Meir must use tamim yil rotain to teach us something else. Lemute psulei hamikdoshim la'acher pejoinam. What happens if you had a carbon and it had a mum? So it has a mum, you're paid it. Now that you were paid, you have this animal. Now we know there are restrictions on this animal because we know the halacha is you're allowed to shecht it and you're allowed to eat the meat, but you're not allowed to do work with it. You're not allowed to let it grow fur and shear the wool. You're not allowed to use it for its milk. The only thing you're allowed to use an animal for that had a mum that you were paid was once a carbon is to eat. So the question is, would you be allowed to make another mum on this animal? Since there are restrictions on this animal, maybe it would also be also to make a mum on them, that you are allowed to make a mum in such an animal. Zokt Rashi, Hoyel Vasiri Begizi Kedamim Pek Beit Bechar is Tizbach V'Laikiso. Kamash Mlam the Hoyel V'Niftu. Once you were paid to them already, Shari Lahatal by Mum, you're allowed to make a mum in such an animal. Avol Koydim Pidyon Oser, but before you're paid, you're not allowed to make a mum in an animal, even though it already has a mum. V'Rabbanon Nami Yaksiv Kol Mum Lo Yevoi. What do the Rabbanon do with the pasuk of Kol Mum, which Reb Meir used to be marba, even if it has a mum already, you're not allowed to make another mum? The Rabbanan use it to teach us the following halacha: the chol mum lo yiboy ein li elo shelo yitein by mum. I'm changing the girsa because before I'm changing the girsa, I only know that I'm not allowed to make a mum. The lav says don't actually make a mum b'yadayim, but shelo yigraim lo al yidei minayin. Shelo yigraim lo al yidei. How do you know that you're also prohibited from doing something that will indirectly cause you to get a mum? You're surely not allowed to make a mum. That's outright a violation of what the Torah says. But what about causing indirectly that it should get a mum? How would you cause indirectly that an animal should get a mum? Very simple. If you put bait on the ear of this animal that's a carbon, either dough or some dried fig, now an animal is going to want to eat it. So an animal is going to jump on this carbon and bite its ear to get the treat off of it. How do you know you're not allowed to do that either? Because you're indirectly causing the animal to get a mum. Talmud Leimer kol mum. It says kol mum, amar mum, v'amar kol mum, to tell you that not only is it usher to make a mum, kol mum, it's even usher to indirectly cause a mum. Amar Abami, hindiach sar al gabi isa. Let's get back to our sugya of Menachos. What happens if you put yeast into the dough or on top of the dough that you're preparing for mincha? So you didn't actually make it chametz, but you definitely caused the chemical reaction that's going to lead to making it chametz. So hindiach ser al gabi isa v'halach v'yashav loy, and then you left. V'nischamta me'elah. Now this dough became chametz me'elah, because over time, leaving the yeast there will cause that chemical reaction and create a chametz dough. Chayiv aleh, you'll be chayiv on it, just like Maisa Shabbos. What Maisa Shabbos means? So Rashi, if you take raw meat and you put it on the barbecue on Shabbos, you're not chayiv instantly, it didn't cook yet. It's going to cook by itself over time. So you didn't actually do the cooking. you did something that caused that it should become cooked later. You're chayiv for bishul. This is no different. You put the yeast in, you cause it to become chametz. That's going to be the iser. Fragt Gemara, but that's not true. Umayis Shabbos kahai gavle mi mechayiv. Would you actually be chayiv for such an action on Shabbos? The Omer Rabba Bar Bar Chana. Rabba Bar Bar Chana said, turning on to Nun Zayin Amar Aleph. Omer Rabbi Yochanan, Hiniach Basar al Gabi Gecholim. If you put Basar on Gecholim, Heifach boy, if you flipped it over so it should get well done on both sides and become cooked through and through, then you'll be chayiv. But loy hipach boy potter. If you didn't flip it over, you just put it on the grill, you will be potter. So the problem you clearly see that it's not enough just to do something that will indirectly cause it over time to be cooked. You have to actively be involved in its cooking process. So how could you learn from there that by the mincha, you don't have to be actively involved in the chametz process? You could just drop the yeast off and then let it happen by itself, and it'll still be the iser. And you're saying it's like Shabbos? By Shabbos, actually, the loch is not so. By Shabbos, you're only chayiv if you were actively involved in the cooking process.
Is it where it's hot enough, putting it on where it's hot enough to cook on Shabbos? Or it isn't yet cooking, but it's going to cook on Shabbos?
Well, it's mashma from the Gemara here that even if it's eventually going to cook, you have to be actively involved in the cooking process.
Initially, when you put it on, let's say it's not going to cook yet because it's not hot enough, but it's going to get hot.
So the bottom side will get cooked, but the top side won't, right? You need to be able to fully cook it through and through in order for it to, you should be chayiv.
One side is cooked, that's it.
So maybe if you leave it there for a very, very long time, it will eventually cook, but it doesn't matter. You have to be more involved in the process. You can't just do something. But that you're not involved in the full cooking. It's not a complete cooking. You have to be involved in the full cooking. So the problem is, by bishul, you have to be involved in the full cooking. Yet by the mincha, we're saying just like by Shabbos, by the mincha, you don't have to be involved in the full cooking. That doesn't make sense. Zokt Gemara Amar Rava, my chayiv nami de ka'amar by the mincha is k'maiset tzli Shabbos. What it means is, if you merely drop the yeast on the dough and you indirectly cause it to become chametz, that's chayiv, just like by tzli on Shabbos, where you put it on and you turned it over. In other words, by a mincha, there's much less involvement required to be over the iser than there would be by a Maisa Shabbos. By a Maisa Shabbos, you got to flip it over in order to be chayiv, but by the mincha Zakta Gemara, you don't need to do so much. It's enough just to start the process. Gufa, Amar Rabba Bar Bechana Amar B'Yochanan, Hiniach Bos al Gabe Gecholim. You put meat on Gecholim, Hepech by chayiv, Hepech by potter. Fragt Gemara, the devil is in the details over here. Hey Chedami, Ilema di Eloi Hepech by Loi Boshel. If you're going to tell me had he not flipped it over, it would never have cooked. Pshita. Clearly, you didn't cook it because what you did didn't lead to it becoming fully cooked. Elo, you have to say the Eloi Mahabechle Nami have a bishul. You must say that even if he wouldn't have flipped it over, eventually there would have been a bishul, and now there's a chiddush that you're not chayiv until you flip it over. But the question is, why taka aren't you chayiv? Like Reb Shimon asked, if it's eventually going to cook, you did your thing. Amai loy mechayiv. Zogt Gemara loy tricha. I'll tell you what the scenario is. The loy hepech bei, had he not flipped it over, have a boshel mitzad echad, but not fully. It would have never become fully cooked, even if had he not turned it over. But have a boshel mitzad echad kameichel ben destroy. It would only have become 1/3 of the way cooked by leaving it only on one side. I guess the flame was such that it would never have heated it up more than a third cooked, even on one side. And when you flip it over, boshel mishnei todin kamachal ben destroy, the kamash malon. The chol mitzarechad kemachal ben desoy lo klumu. So that's a chiddush. If it would fully cook, then avada you're chayiv, even by putting it on and not flipping it over, which is what you asked. So you're 100% right. If you actually put the meat down and it's going to become fully cooked over time, avada you're chayiv just for putting it down. But here, at the most, it's only going to become machal ben desoy. And the chiddush here is machal ben desoy on one side doesn't count. Fully cooked on one side would count because you fully cooked part of the meat. But if you didn't fully cook any part of the meat, you only cooked it kamacha b'dersoy, there the whole thing has to be kamacha b'dersoy. Partially cooked kamacha b'dersoy would not be a violation of Shabbos. Amarava, v'imnitz leboy k'grogrois mitzad echad, v'mokom echad chayiv. If in one area it became fully cooked, how much has to become fully cooked? The size of a grogrois, then that will be chayiv. That's a deraisa. So that means even without flipping it over, if you put it on and it will become fully cooked, at least the size of a grogrois, but in one place, it will be chayiv. Amar Ravina Ravashi, b'makom echad in b'shnayim agimel mekayim shloy. What if you left it there? There wouldn't be one place altogether, the shear of a grogrois that would become cooked, but there would be several different spots that if you add them all together, you'll have the sum total of a grogrois that's cooked. That wouldn't be mechayiv you. I'll prove to you otherwise. But now we learned. HaKodeach kolshu. Kodeach is to drill a hole in wood. If you drill a hole in wood, even the smallest little hole, chayiv, you're going to be chayiv. What is the iser of kodeach? I believe Rashi says that it's going to be boina, drilling a hole to accomplish. Rashi does not say boina, but I believe it's boina. So hechadami. What does it mean, a tiny little hole? If it's one tiny little hole in one place, that wouldn't be boina because it doesn't have any use. There's nothing you can do with a pinhole in wood. Ella, lav, it must mean you drilled multiple small holes, the chazal tzirif, and then you could chop out in between. Sometimes to make a bigger hole, you'll make a whole bunch of small holes, and then you'll chisel out in between, and you'll get the big hole out of it. So you see clearly that you could be mitzaref holes. So if you could be mitzaref holes to add up to a full malacha, why can't you be mitzaref little areas of the meat that are less than the groigris to be a full groigris? In fact, by kadech kol shu chayiv, it doesn't mean multiple places. So there's no tziruf. One hole, one small hole in one place. You're going to ask me, what does that accomplish? Why would there be a malach involved if it doesn't accomplish anything? You know what it could be used as? A keyhole. It could be used as a keyhole, and the keyhole is something that has value, and therefore you will be chayiv. But you don't have any raya from here that you could combine multiple areas. The Ikad Amri, there was another version of this same halacha that's 180 degrees the opposite of how we learned it. Amarava afilu b'shnayim v'gimel mekayim would be chayiv. So if you put it on the barbecue and 2 or 3 small little spots got cooked, and you add them all together, it will be the shear of a groigris. There will be a chiyuv of Shabbos, which is the opposite of how we quoted Rav a moment ago. Amalei Ravina Ravashi, maybe I could bring a raya. So we're going to have the same sugya, but instead of it being a kasha, now it's a raya. So you have a raya that you can mitzaref different areas to reach one malacha. That's not the case. Maybe the brisa that says making a small hole will be a malacha, that's because that small hole has value. The value is that it can be used as a keyhole. Okay, should we stop here? We'll go back there. It's 46.
We have a place.
Let's stop.
We'll stop.
Let's stop. Shkoyach.
Shkoyach. So tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning it will be. We'll be learning at 5 o'clock on the old Zeiger. Let's call a spade a spade. We're learning 5 o'clock of the Alta Zeiger. Okay, gewaltig.
Yeah.
Shkoyach.